A judge's gavel slammed down in a packed courtroom, dripping with tension. Guilty on all counts. The verdict echoed off the mahogany panels as two teenage girls, faces pale and eyes wide, sat shackled at the defense table. Whispers rippled through the spectators as the older sister, her voice raw with dread, shouted, "Call our father. He's the U.S." "Attorney General!" Silence gripped the room before the bailiffs moved in, but the words hung in the air, an ultimatum wrapped in desperation. Cameras flashed, phones whipped out to record every second. The judge's eyes narrowed behind her spectacles, but a single shot had already been fired across the bow of a system built to control outcomes. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun bled gold across the parking lot. In a black SUV, Michael Reed's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening. His heart thundered in his ears like a battle drum. Beside him, Jack Carter watched through the windshield, the gears of his mind already shifting into high alert. Michael's gaze never wavered from the entrance. Finally, he exhaled, reached for his secure phone, and punched in a number only a few trusted souls could dial. 1 ring, 2 rings. He counted, jaw locked. Then a crisp voice. "Office of Inspector General. Who's calling?" "This is Attorney General Reed," Michael replied, voice measured steel. "Authorization code 739 Alpha Delta." A breath, then. "Code confirmed. How may we assist?" Michael's tone was quiet but absolute. "Initiate a full federal oversight on the Jackson Reed trial. Every document, every motion, every piece of correspondence. If a breath was drawn inside that courtroom, I want to see it." "Understood, sir. Immediate implementation." He ended the call and turned to Jack. "It's begun." Across town at the county sheriff's office, Judge Harold Grant paced in his private chambers. The polished wood floor reflected the afternoon light that slanted through Venetian blinds. Sheriff Tom Dawson leaned against a filing cabinet, arms folded across his chest, eyes flicking between Grant and the door. District Attorney Laura Sinclair sat at a small conference table, the pearls at her throat glinting as she twisted them nervously. "He won't let this rest," Laura said, voice low. "He has the highest motive now." Grant stopped and faced them. His tie was perfectly knotted, his robe still hung on the chair behind him. "Then we stay ahead. I don't want any trace left. Security camera footage, jury logs, internal messages, all gone or unavailable by morning." Laura swallowed. "Technical glitch? Administrative error?" Grant's lips curled into a cold smile. "Precisely. And Sheriff, smooth over the footage. Make it look like the system just failed." Dawson gave a curt nod. "I'll handle my team." "No questions asked." Grant turned back to Laura. "And you, suppress the jury selection notes. Label them clerical misplacement. If anyone asks, we don't have them." Laura exhaled sharply. "Yes, Your Honor." In the neighboring interview room, 2 deputies loaded evidence onto a stack of USB drives. The judge's orders hung over them like a storm cloud. Meanwhile, in the cramped concrete cell block of the county jail, 19-year-old Jessica "Jess" Reed sat on the narrow cot, pacing 7 steps forward, 7 back. Her knuckles throbbed where she'd struck the wall in frustration. Each breath was a reminder of the clock ticking against the midnight deadline. A federal oversight committee would arrive soon, but would it be in time? A few doors down, her younger sister Emily lay cross-legged on a thin mattress in the medical wing, sketching musical notes on scraps of toilet paper. Music had always been her refuge. Now it was her lifeline, the only tether that kept her mind anchored. Her ribs ached with every breath. A cough racked her slender frame, and when she pressed her hand to her mouth, she tasted copper. Blood. In a dingy motel room on the outskirts of town, Michael Reed and Jack Carter had transformed a pair of twin beds into a makeshift command center. Court documents lay scattered like fallen leaves across the faded carpet. Empty coffee cups and takeout cartons formed small towers. The hum of a portable fan did little to cut the stifling heat of the summer night. "Look at this," Michael said, leaning over a police memo. The lamp cast his shadow large against the wall, magnifying the intensity in his eyes. Officer Dale Stanton appears in the booking logs for that night, 3 hours on scene. But his name never surfaced in any trial exhibit or witness statement. Jack tapped away on his laptop. He resigned 8 months before the trial. Internal Affairs sealed the report. You can't find a single detail. No charges filed, nothing in the public record. Michael felt a wave of anger and relief wash over him. He saw everything. Why was he pulled out? Jack's brow furrowed. Because someone needed him silenced. Look at the timeline we mapped. His disappearance from the case lines up perfectly with the jury selection delay. Michael uncapped a marker and stuck the memo on the wall, joining it with a red string to the timeline. Tomorrow we find him. They spent the rest of the night tracing Stanton's digital footprint, property records, phone logs, utility bills. With each clue, a picture emerged of a once respected officer pushed out by unseen forces. By dawn, they had his last known address, a weathered trailer 5 miles south. Back in the jail basement, Jess's pacing came to an abrupt halt as the overhead lights flickered. For a moment, hope flared. Federal inspectors. But the flicker passed, and the harsh glare returned. She pressed her forehead against the cinder block wall and whispered, "Hang on, Em." Emily finished a line of music and folded the paper into the frayed seam of her Bible. Second Chances, she had titled it, the melody that rose gentle as dawn, then built into a storm of resilience. At first light, Michael parked his rental car in front of a ramshackle trailer marked only by a rust-streaked mailbox labeled Stanton. Overgrown weeds choked the yard. A mangy hound lifted its head and growled as Michael approached. He wore simple clothes, a plain navy windbreaker, jeans, leatherback shoes. No hint of the Attorney General. Jack trailed behind, body camera secured beneath his shirt. Michael knocked firmly. Stanton's door swung open to reveal a gaunt man in a stained tank top. His eyes betrayed recognition and fear. "What do you want?" Stanton's voice was low, defensive. Michael remained calm. "I need to talk. No guns, no threats. Just answers." Stanton hesitated, then stepped aside. "They'll come for me if I say anything." Michael's gaze hardened. "Then say it today. Tell me what happened in that courtroom. Everything you saw." Inside, the trailer was dark, cluttered with empty beer cans and old newspapers. Stanton sank onto a sagging armchair. Through thick air, he confessed. The judge's private orders, the buried evidence, the manipulated jury. Each detail a dagger, each name another link in the chain of corruption. Michael's pen flew over a notepad, capturing every word. The sun climbed higher, rays filtering through dust motes. The confession concluded with Stanton's trembling admission. "I didn't know it would go this far." Michael placed a hand on Stanton's shoulder. "You did the right thing." He left Stanton with a federal affidavit and a promise of protection. As he drove away, dawn's light cut through the morning mist, illuminating the road ahead. The first domino had fallen. That afternoon, news of Stanton's arrest splashed across every network. Dockside Rule, National Ledger, East Coast Daily. Headlines screamed, "Ex-officer arrested in high-profile case. Federal investigation uncovers judicial misconduct." In Michael's hospital suite, monitors beeped, but his eyes were glued to the TV. Drinking in each report, Jack leaned in, breath barely audible over the TV sound. "It's happening." Michael nodded, voice firm. "Now we go win." In the sterile hospital visitation room, Jess watched her father approach. Gone were the shackles. Instead, her eyes saw a man transformed by purpose. Michael sat opposite, separated only by a pane of reinforced glass. He pressed his palm to the window. "I'm here," he whispered. "We're gonna fix this." Beside Jess, Emily arrived, frail but determined. She held out a scrap of paper, the final measures of Second Chances. Michael closed his eyes as if committing every note to memory. As evening shadows lengthened, they sat together in silent hope. Tomorrow the retrial would begin. For now, nothing else mattered but their reunion and the promise that justice, real justice, would prevail. The morning sun filtered through the Venetian blinds as Michael Reed stepped into the federal courthouse lobby. His shoes clicked against the polished marble floor, echoing off ornate columns and past the early arriving courthouse staff. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee from a nearby dispenser. Today marked the first day of formal oversight, and despite the stiffness in his suit, he moved with quiet determination. In his hand, he carried a thick dossier labeled Exhibit A through Z in bold black marker. Each section contained transcripts, audio recordings, and the affidavit from Officer Stanton. He paused by a bronze plaque that listed the names of past chief judges, their accomplishments engraved in elegant script. This courthouse would soon hold a hearing that might reshape public trust in the judicial system, and he drew a steadying breath before heading to meet Judge Marilyn Dorsey in her chambers. A few steps away, Special Agent Clara Hayes of the Inspector General's office adjusted her badge as she approached the security checkpoint. She showed her credentials to the deputy, who nodded with respect and directed her through the metal detector. Hayes was calm, professional, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, but her eyes held the same steely focus that had earned her a reputation for thorough investigations. Inside the secured corridors, she met with two fellow investigators, passing off transcripts for digital scanning and locking down evidence submissions in sealed envelopes. The pace was brisk. There was no room for error now that the spotlight had turned to this case. In Judge Dorsey's chambers, the walls lined with legal tomes and family photographs, the judge sat behind her massive oak desk reviewing the pre-hearing motions. She glanced up as Michael entered, her expression both courteous and steely. "Good morning, Attorney General Reed," she said, voice low and purposeful. "I have reviewed the exhibits you provided. Such comprehensive documentation is rare at this stage." Michael bowed his head in acknowledgement and placed a copy of the Stanton affidavit on her desk. Judge Dorsey's eyes narrowed as she read the opening paragraph of Stanton's sworn statement, her pen tapping a quiet rhythm on the mahogany surface. "We will hear arguments from both sides this afternoon. I expect a concise presentation focused on procedural violations." As they spoke, a muted television in the corner of her chambers displayed the morning news. Headlines scrolled, "Federal oversight initiated in high-profile cases. Judge Grant under scrutiny for alleged misconduct. Public outcry grows over twin sisters' convictions." The images of Emma and Jessica Reed flashed across the screen, their faces pale but resolute. The public's empathy had shifted decisively in their favor, and that momentum was crucial. Dorsey made a note to call for extra security in the hearing room. She did not want outside protests to distract from the legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Michael's daughters were landing in a specially arranged transport van bound for the courthouse medical unit. Both wearing civilian clothes, free from restraints, they arrived escorted by federal marshals. Celeste's shoulders were squared, though faint tremors betrayed her ongoing anxiety. She wore a simple black sweater and jeans, her dark hair tied back. Emma, still recovering, leaned on a medical attendant for support, her cheeks hollow but determined. A medical evaluation team had followed them to ensure that Emma's fragile condition was monitored, ready to step in at the slightest sign of distress. In a small anteroom outside the courtroom, Michael knelt beside Emma, checking the IV line attached to her arm. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, mindful of the streaming cameras visible through tinted recording booths. Emma offered a weak smile. "Nervous," she admitted, "but ready. This is our shot." Celeste reached out to squeeze her sister's hand, their fingers interlacing in a familiar gesture of solidarity. Michael surveyed them both, pride and protective instinct warring in his expression. He straightened up, smoothing his tie. "We'll get through this together. Judge Dorsey will see the truth." The courtroom doors opened and the bailiff called, "All rise. The United States District Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Dorsey presiding." The gallery rose as the judge entered, her black robe sweeping behind her. Michael led his daughters to seats at the plaintiff's table, then turned to stand at the lectern when invited. Defense counsel, representing the state, sat with Judge Grant's legal team, faces stern but betraying tension. The courtroom buzzed with hushed conversation as news crews set up optics and microphones. Judge Dorsey scanned the packed courtroom before speaking. Be seated. We are here to address the federal petition for oversight in the case of State versus Reed, formerly State versus Jackson and Reynolds. The petitioner alleges procedural misconduct and suppression of evidence during the original trial. She nodded toward Michael. Mr. Reed, you may present your argument. Michael approached the lectern with measured steps, the tally of his life's work in the thick binders before him. He faced the jury box, where a panel of 12 sat, selected to hear these preliminary motions only, and began. His voice was calm, authoritative. Your Honor, members of this oversight committee, we stand here not to undermine the judiciary, but to restore faith in it. During the prior trial, key evidence was suppressed. Officer Dale Stanton, whose testimony would have exonerated my daughters, was suddenly removed from the case, and audio recordings I have submitted reveal explicit instructions from the bench to manipulate jury selection. He clicked to an exhibit slide behind him, which displayed Stanton's signed affidavit. This affidavit confirms that Judge Grant personally ordered the suppression of exculpatory testimony, a violation of both state and federal law. In the seconds that followed, a ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. The defense attorney rose, adjusting his jacket. Your Honor, this is hearsay. Officer Stanton was never a formally designated witness. Any statements he made outside the formal record are inadmissible. The petition should be dismissed as lacking legal foundation. His voice was smooth, practiced. He glanced at Judge Grant, who sat rigidly, mask-like composure betraying internal alarm. Judge Dorsey held up a hand to maintain order. Mr. Patterson, you may address the admissibility of the audio recording, but I remind you that oversight petitions operate under different evidentiary standards. The question here is whether a plausible basis for federal intervention exists. She turned back to Michael. Proceed. Michael nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. The recording was captured on secure government-issued devices. Voice analysis confirms that the speaker is indeed Judge Grant, and the content, prior instructions to influence juror empathy, is a clear violation of the defendant's right to a fair trial. Furthermore, the original trial exhibits omitted multiple pieces of evidence that were material to the defense. Under the Brunson-Leavitt doctrine, federal courts have jurisdiction to remedy manifest injustices when state proceedings are shown to be fundamentally flawed. Across the aisle, defense counsel frowned, rifling through his papers. He stammered, Your Honor, I object. The Brunson-Leavitt doctrine does not apply until after all state post-conviction remedies are exhausted. His tone rose, laced with indignation. Public gallery members sat forward, sensing the tension. Judge Dorsey fixed him with a steady gaze. Because the petition alleges active suppression of evidence by the trial judge himself, I find that the exhaustion requirement is excused under the exception for extraordinary circumstances. I intend to admit the affidavit and audio recording for the purposes of this preliminary hearing. A low murmur ran through the courtroom. The defense attorney slumped into his seat. Michael allowed himself a momentary inward exhale before continuing. For the next 2 hours, Michael and his team laid out each point of their case. Altered police logs, missing jury instructions transcripts, statistical analysis of jury selection bias, medical records omitted from the trial showing Emma's heart condition. Clara Hayes and her fellow agents provided sworn statements verifying the chain of custody for each piece of evidence. Emma and Celeste's health reports were tendered, illustrating the fundamental unfairness of the prior proceedings. Throughout it all, Celeste sat with her chin held high, though fatigue weighed on her. Emma rested against Michael's side, her breathing steady, the IV line a silent testament to her bravery. At one point, Emma coughed sharply, and Michael reached over to steady her, his eyes flicking to Judge Dorsey in silent appeal. The judge offered a brief nod of acknowledgement, then returned her attention to the binders before her. Finally, Judge Dorsey cleared her throat. I will take the matter under advisement. This hearing is adjourned. A written ruling on the petition for oversight will be issued within 24 hours. The gavel fell. Cameras flashed as attorneys rose. Michael guided his daughters toward the exit, where a handful of supporters and press members waited. In the hallway, reporters lobbed questions. Michael answered succinctly, his professional voice returning. "We believe justice was delayed but not denied. We await the judge's ruling and will continue to advocate for my daughters until their names are cleared." He embraced his daughters briefly before they were whisked away to the medical unit. That night, Michael returned to the modest motel command center where Jack awaited with fresh documents. The verdict was still pending, but momentum was clearly on their side. They pored over procedural rules and drafted a proposed draft order for Judge Dorsey to consider. Meanwhile, Emma slept peacefully, her breathing monitored by a nurse on call. Over the next 12 hours, the public narrative intensified. Opinion columns, online forums, and social media debates surged, with calls for transparency and accountability. A vigil was held outside the county courthouse at dawn, candles lit in solidarity with the twins, dozens chanting for justice. Local clergy led prayers, while protesters held placards reading "Fair Trial for All" and "No More Cover-Ups." Inside a traveling news van, Mara Jensen, the former clerk who had leaked Judge Grant's instructions, prepared for a live interview. She sat under harsh lighting, her face pale but resolute, ready to detail the depths of the cover-up she had helped expose. Back in the courthouse, Judge Dorsey worked late into the night drafting her findings. She carefully cited the legal standards violated, the systemic failures exposed, and concluded her 16-page memorandum. Petition granted. Federal oversight will proceed, and a new trial is hereby ordered. The memo was filed at precisely 7:03 a.m. The courthouse clerk posted the notice on the official bulletin board, and a ripple of astonishment spread once more. News vans converged on the entrance. Michael, having been notified by text, arrived to photograph the official docket entry. He allowed himself a small, weary smile. Later that morning, he sat in a small conference room with Celeste, Emma, Miss Leia, and Dr. Ronnie Desai, who explained Emma's treatment plan post-trial and Celeste's ongoing counseling needs. Michael laid out the next steps, choosing a compassionate jury, identifying new witnesses, coordinating security to prevent intimidation. There were still battles ahead, but the foundation was solid. As the late afternoon light once more cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, Michael watched his daughters walk beside him, free from chains, their heads held high. He realized that this fight had cost them so much, but it also revealed their incredible strength. Together, they had rewritten their own story, one in which justice, however delayed, would ultimately prevail. The morning light filtered through the courthouse windows as Michael Reed, Emma, and Celeste arrived for the retrial's opening day. The tension in the air was palpable, a blend of anticipation, hope, and the long shadow of past injustice. Outside, supporters of the twins had gathered once again, holding banners that read, "Justice at last" and "Fair trial, fair verdict," their voices raised in quiet chants. Reporters and camera crews clustered near the entrance, eager to capture each moment as the family walked up the steps. Inside, the courtroom had been rearranged for the full retrial. New jury boxes had been filled with a panel of cross-section citizens, carefully vetted to ensure impartiality. Federal marshals guided attendees to their seats. The bench had been cleared of any physical reminders of the previous trial. The judge's bench looked pristine, as if awaiting a fresh start. Michael paused at the entrance, drawing a deep breath. He glanced at Emma, whose pale face was framed by dark hair pulled back neatly, and at Celeste, whose defenses had softened but whose gaze was still fiercely protective. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. "All rise. The United States District Court is now in session. Judge Dorsey presiding." The courtroom stood as Judge Marilyn Dorsey entered, her robe crisp and her expression solemn. She nodded to the jury and then to the gallery before taking her seat. "Be seated." Michael stepped forward at the lectern. "Your Honor, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we begin anew. The weight of past errors rests on this court, and it falls to us to set the record straight. During the original trial, evidence was withheld, witnesses were silenced, and a judge's bias corrupted the process. That cannot stand. Today, the truth will be heard." His voice carried across the hushed room, each syllable clear and resolute. Opposing him, state's attorney Luke Patterson rose. He was calm, his suit impeccable, but the stiffness in his posture betrayed his unease. "Your Honor, while the defense paints a dire picture, the facts remain that Miss Reed and Miss E. Reed were convicted in a court of law. This retrial is bound by the same statutes and precedents. We do not dispute that procedural missteps occurred, but they were technical in nature and did not prejudice the outcome. The state will demonstrate that the evidence of guilt is overwhelming." His words were precise, but they rang hollow to many in the courtroom who remembered the gavel's earlier hammer. Judge Dorsey gave brief instructions. "Counsel, you will present your witnesses in the order specified in the pre-trial submissions. We will begin with the federal agents who conducted the oversight investigation." She looked to Agent Clara Hayes. "Miss Hayes, please take the stand." In crisp testimony, Agent Hayes described the process by which she and her team had reviewed the original trial records, the secure chain of custody logs, the audio recordings of Judge Grant's off-the-record instructions, the suppressed jury questionnaires, and Stanton's sealed personnel file. Each document had been authenticated with forensic rigor. She explained how the oversight team had discovered inconsistencies in the timestamps of exhibits, digital footprints showing edits to trial transcripts, and the abrupt deletion of jury selection records. The jurors' surveys had revealed that the initial panel had been steered by leading questions from court officers, a subtle but profound influence. During cross-examination, Patterson attempted to undermine her methods. "Agent Hayes, are you not aware that oversight investigations can be motivated by political considerations? Could your team's report have been influenced by the Attorney General's personal stake?" He emphasized the word personal in a pointed tone. Hayes remained composed. "Sir, all procedures followed were standard IG protocol. The evidence speaks for itself. Political motivation does not alter the veracity of documented facts." Her eyes held unwavering conviction, and even Patterson's colleagues shifted in their seats. Next, Michael called Mara Jensen to the stand. The former clerk entered with measured steps, her face pale but dignified. The courtroom settled into a hush as she spoke. "I served as the clerk in Judge Grant's chambers during the original proceedings. I had access to private jury instructions and internal memoranda. On the morning of jury selection, Judge Grant held a closed-door session and instructed the clerk to steer the standard jury questionnaire responses to favor a guilty verdict. He said, and I quote, 'These girls aren't like the rest. They need a lesson.'" She paused, looking pointedly at Grant's empty chair. "I recorded that session on a personal recorder. It's been authenticated and submitted as Exhibit C." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Celeste pressed her hand to her mouth, tears glinting in her eyes. Emma leaned against Michael's shoulder, choking back her own emotion. A video played of the clandestine recording, Judge Grant's commanding voice clear as day, overriding the veneer of judicial impartiality. Even the judge's robe hanging empty in the corner seemed stained with its memory. Patterson objected, but Judge Dorsey overruled him. "The recording is admissible under federal oversight provisions." She instructed the clerk to enter it into the record. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the playback concluded and the speaker IDs matched. As midday approached, medical testimony began. Dr. Ronnie Desai, a pediatric cardiologist who had been called in to assess Emma's condition, took the stand via video link. In calm, measured terms, she described Emma's congenital heart condition, a rare defect that, if not managed carefully, could lead to fatal arrhythmia. On the night of the original arrest, Miss Reed went into cardiac distress. The jail's infirmary was unprepared, lacking even basic emergency protocols for such a condition. Had she received prompt medical attention, she would not have suffered the irreversible heart damage she now carries. She presented hospital records showing lapsed medication and delayed intervention, the medical logs ever missing or inconsistently dated. Cross-examination by Patterson was technical. Doctor, are you saying that any lapse in medical care constitutes legal prejudice? The state is not a personal caregiver. Doctor, Desai replied steadily. When a court orders confinement without ensuring the health of a known medical patient, it violates the fundamental right to humane treatment, impacting the defendant's ability to participate in her defense. Her testimony resonated with the jury panel, many of whom exchanged silent nods. The afternoon session continued with Officer Dale Stanton's live testimony. Federal marshals had flown him in under witness protection. The courtroom security was tight. Stanton's face was partially hidden behind a screen. His voice quavered at first but hardened with determination as he spoke. He described the chaos of the original arraignment night. I arrived at 8:15 p.m. The sisters were calm, compliant. I filled out my initial report, noting their cooperative behavior. That report was never filed. Instead, I was ordered to hand it to the bailiff and leave the premises. Weeks later, I learned that my report was suppressed, and I'm here to set the record straight. His recounting of the chain of custody breach, the missing evidence locker logs, and the forced removal from proceedings was met with solemn attention. With Stanton's testimony complete, Michael stood at the lectern for his closing argument. The courtroom was hushed. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard sworn accounts of evidence tampering, witness suppression, and medical neglect. We have seen the stark recording of Judge Grant's bias. We know now that justice was not blind. It was willfully directed. The question is not whether my daughters broke any laws. They did not, but whether a fair trial was conducted. Today, you have the power to right that injustice. His voice cracked with emotion, but the strength in his eyes held the room. Patterson rose for his rebuttal. The state acknowledges procedural errors, but they do not rise to the level of nullifying a verdict. The evidence of wrongdoing pertains to internal court housekeeping, not the core facts of guilt or innocence. His voice, though polished, sounded defensive. Judge Dorsey then provided the jury instructions. She spoke of the duty to consider the totality of evidence, to weigh the impact of procedural misconduct on the trial's fairness. The jury filed out to deliberate, their footsteps echoing in the quiet courtroom. The public gallery held its breath. As the jury deliberated, Michael and his daughters retreated to a small waiting room. Celeste sat on a narrow couch, her fingers entangled in her jeans. Emma rested her head on Michael's shoulder, silent tears of hope and fear mingling on her cheeks. Michael placed a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "I'm proud of you both. You've already won by standing tall through all of this." Emma nodded, her grip tight on his suit jacket. Celeste closed her eyes, drawing strength from her father's resolve. Hours passed like moments. Reporters gathered outside, their phones ready to broadcast the verdict. In the corridors, courthouse staff paused, sensing the gravity of the moment. Finally, the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise! The jury has reached a verdict." The courtroom stood as the jury filed in and the foreperson handed a slip of paper to the bailiff. He read it aloud. "In the case of State versus Reed on the charge of conspiracy to defraud the court, verdict, not guilty. On the charge of resisting unlawful arrest, not guilty." A collective gasp filled the room. Then the gallery erupted in applause. Emma gasped, tears streaming as she embraced her sister. Michael's eyes glistened with relief and triumph. Judge Dorsey pounded the gavel gently. "Court is adjourned." She then rose and walked over to Michael and the twins. She shook his hand, her expression both respectful and relieved. "You have been vindicated," she said softly. "May this court and this community learn from these mistakes and ensure they never happen again." Back in the visitation room, free from glass and chains, Michael held his daughters in a tight embrace. Emma's IV drip stood beside her bed, but her eyes shone with new life. Celeste rested her head against his chest, Her fierce armor dissolved into tears of joy. Miss Leia and Dr. Desai stood nearby, sharing in the emotional reunion. As evening descended, the family walked out of the courthouse into a sea of supporters. Cameras flashed, voices cheered, and for the first time in months, Michael Reed saw his daughters truly free. He realized that justice, though long delayed, had finally arrived, and with it, a second chance for them all. 6 months had passed since the storm of the retrial had subsided, but for the Reed family, life had only just begun to settle. The morning air was crisp as Michael Reed stepped onto the portico of the United States Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., briefcase in hand. Reporters jostled for position behind the podium, microphones thrust forward like eager hands. The Justice Department seal loomed behind him, its polished brass surface gleaming under the bright lights of camera flashes. Michael paused, surveying the sea of faces. He drew a deep breath and approached the microphone. Good morning. Today I am proud to announce the launch of the National Judicial Integrity Initiative. His voice carried the weight of authority and personal conviction. This bipartisan program will establish transparent oversight mechanisms in federal and state courts to prevent the kind of misconduct that almost cost my daughters their futures. He unveiled the key components: mandatory audio recordings of all bench conferences, secure electronic logs of jury selection processes, and an independent review board to investigate claims of judicial bias. Each proposal was framed as a safeguard for the fundamental right to a fair trial. Questions erupted from the press corps. How would these measures be enforced? What about privacy concerns? Michael fielded each query calmly, emphasizing that justice flourished in the light of accountability. Back in Richmond, Virginia, Emma and Celeste Reed were settling into a new rhythm. Emma had returned to high school on a part-time schedule, her days a balance of assignments, medical appointments, and a music therapy group she had founded for students with chronic conditions. She carried her guitar case down a sunlit hallway lined with lockers, greeting classmates who waved and offered words of support. The shy smile she wore now was more genuine, no longer the mask of fear that had shadowed her earlier steps. In the music room, she taught a small group of students to play the piano, her fingers dancing across the keys as she guided them through the opening bars of Second Chances, the piece she had composed in solitary confinement. The melody carried the story of her journey, soft raindrops of hope that swelled into a triumphant crescendo. As the final chord sounded, the students clapped, and Emma offered a radiant grin, her heart swelling with pride. Meanwhile, Celeste had immersed herself in social justice work, volunteering at a youth legal clinic housed in the basement of a community center. She advised young people facing minor charges, drawing on her own ordeal to explain their rights and help them navigate bureaucracy. Her passion for advocacy burned brightly. She spoke at town halls about the importance of legal representation for the marginalized. Each speech was delivered with quiet strength, her voice clear and unwavering. One crisp autumn evening, the sisters and Michael gathered at their mother's old farmhouse for a small family dinner. The table was laden with homemade bread, roasted vegetables, and a simple apple pie fresh from the oven. Candles flickered in mason jars at the center, casting a warm glow. Miss Leia, Michael's assistant and steadfast friend, was there, along with Dr. Ronnie Desai, who had become a treasured family friend since her life-saving care for Emma. They sat on mismatched chairs around a weathered wooden table. Laughter filled the air as Celeste recounted a mishap from her clinic shift involving a reluctant interpreter who mixed up French and Spanish legal terms. Emma teased her sister about forgetting her lunch and raiding the clinic's vending machine. Michael listened, his smile soft, eyes bright beneath the lines of fatigue that still lingered. He lifted his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, voice warm, "and to second chances." As winter's first snow fell a few weeks later, Emma and Celeste prepared for their first major public concert, a benefit recital to raise funds for the Judicial Integrity Initiative. In the grand hall of a historic theater, a Steinway grand piano sat center stage under a single spotlight. Michael sat in the front row, flanked by Miss Leia and Dr. Desai, nerves giving way to anticipation. Celeste joined Emma on stage, cello in hand. The audience hushed as they began to play Second Chances. The music soared, intertwining piano and cello in a tapestry of resilience and redemption. At the final note, the hall erupted in applause, standing ovations echoing off ornate balconies. Emma's eyes glistened with tears. Celeste beamed, her heart full. Over the following months, the National Judicial Integrity Initiative gained momentum. Legislation modeled on the program's framework passed the Senate Judiciary Committee with bipartisan support. State governors announced pilot programs in their jurisdictions. News outlets ran features on the Reed's journey, highlighting the transformative power of accountability. Michael traveled extensively, testifying before state legislatures, speaking at legal conferences, and meeting with judges open to reform. He embraced his role not only as Attorney General, but as a father-turned-advocate. One afternoon, as cherry blossoms bloomed outside the DOJ building, Michael received a video call from a judge in a rural county who had implemented transparent jury logs. The judge beamed from the screen and recounted how community trust had improved and appeals had decreased. "Your program has changed how we think about justice," he said. Michael nodded, his eyes bright. "That's exactly what we hoped for." Back in Richmond, Celeste and Emma navigated life's ordinary milestones. Celeste applied to college, choosing a university known for its pre-law program. She received her acceptance letter on a rainy Tuesday, and Michael surprised her by framing the envelope and placing it on her desk. Emily, now known to friends as Emma, perused scholarship opportunities for musicians and medical journalism. Together, they planned their futures with cautious optimism. In the quiet hours of a late spring evening, Michael sat in his study going through a stack of letters addressed to the Reed family. He read messages from across the country, survivors of wrongful convictions who had found renewed hope, law students inspired to focus on judicial ethics, judges writing to thank him for the integrity reforms. A small smile curved his lips as he folded each letter and placed it into a wooden box labeled Letters of Hope. He ran a hand over the box's polished surface, the grain warm under his fingertips. At the end of that week, he donned a simple gray suit and made his way to the old farmhouse once more. The family gathered in the living room, which smelled faintly of pine from the fireplace logs burning in the hearth. Celeste sat curled in an armchair, flipping through her college catalog. Emma perched on the armrest, scrolling through upcoming recital venues on her phone. Michael joined them, the wooden floor creaking under his step. "Sisters," he began, voice soft, "I've been thinking about your music piece, Second Chances. There's still a verse you haven't played at the concert." He held out a folded sheet of paper. Celeste took it, unfolding the final measures, a gentle coda evoking sunrise after a long night. Emma's eyes brightened as she read the notation. Together they moved to the old piano that had once belonged to their mother, its keys slightly yellowed from age. As Emma struck the first chord and Celeste joined with her cello, Michael closed his eyes, listening. The music filled the room, art and life interwoven. The golden coda shimmered with promise, an unfinished story now free to continue. In that moment, he realized that justice had not only restored their past, but had composed a future of hope and harmony. And so their story carried on, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The daughters who once faced an unjust verdict now blossomed under transparent courts and supportive communities. The father who found them only after the fact became the architect of systemic change. Together, they wrote their next chapter, proof that second chances, once granted, can lead to a lifetime of renewed beginnings and unbreakable bonds. In early summer, Michael convened the first meeting of the newly formed Federal Judicial Integrity Council in a stately conference room overlooking the Capitol. Stakeholders from diverse backgrounds gathered around a mahogany table, seasoned judges, civil rights attorneys, tech experts specializing in secure record keeping, representatives of the American Bar Association, and members of the public advocacy group Justice for All. The mood was serious but hopeful. Each participant bore the solemn knowledge that the Council's recommendations would shape the future of judicial transparency nationwide. Michael opened the session by recalling the Reed twins' ordeal, his voice resonating in the vaulted room. "We can no longer leave the administration of justice to chance or personal discretion. Today, we codify our commitment to fairness." He unveiled a pilot program proposal that included 3 core elements: mandatory public access portals for juror demographics, with privacy protections in place, encrypted digital archives of all, evidentiary exhibits accessible to both prosecution and defense, and annual audits of judicial conduct by an independent review board. The group broke into committees, huddling over laptops and documents, debating the logistics of implementation, funding allocations, and legislative pathways. Meanwhile, Emma Reed's health journey continued to intersect with her public life. In June, she traveled to Baltimore to speak at the National Pediatric Cardiology Symposium, sharing her story of survival and the critical need for continuity of care behind bars. Her presentation was met with standing ovations, medical professionals rallying to revise protocols in county jails to include emergency kits and rapid response training. She met backstage with Dr. Desai, now a leading pediatric cardiologist, who grinned as Emma recounted how her testimony had influenced policy. "You've saved lives, Emma," Dr. Desai said, pride shining in her eyes. Back home, Celeste was accepted as a freshman at Georgetown University with a scholarship for public policy majors. Her first semester was a whirlwind. Orientation events, late-night study sessions in the law library, and impassioned debates at the student government meetings. She organized a forum on judicial reform, inviting local judges and attorneys to engage in dialogue with students. The forum's standing room audience spilled into adjoining halls, many swayed by Celeste's personal narrative. Professors lauded her for transforming personal trauma into civic leadership. The Reed family's bond deepened with each milestone. On a crisp autumn weekend, they gathered for a memorial service at the farmhouse to honor their late mother's birthday. Michael arranged a small ceremony under the old oak tree where she had planted daisies in spring. He read from her journals, passages about hope and perseverance that resonated now more than ever. Celeste scattered seeds of purple daisies into the soil, and Emma hummed a soft melody, an early version of Second Chances. As dusk fell, fireflies danced around them, a living reminder that beauty persisted even after darkness. Throughout this period, media interest remained high. Emma and Celeste appeared on national talk shows, The Morning Light, Inside Justice, and even a feature documentary titled Trials and Triumphs. They handled each appearance with grace, recounting their experiences honestly while emphasizing the system's transformation. Ratings surged and viewer feedback poured in. Thousands of emails and letters from people who had endured wrongful convictions or relatives suffering in jails equipped only for punishment, not compassion. Each piece of mail went into the Letters of Hope box, filling the room with stories that underlined the necessity of ongoing vigilance against judicial misconduct. Winter brought new challenges. A snowstorm hit Richmond, causing power outages at the old farmhouse. Emma, concerned for her medical equipment, worked with a local nonprofit to install backup generators at county detention centers, a project she spearheaded with enthusiastic volunteers, including some survivors she had met through her advocacy network. Celeste coordinated legal workshops in makeshift community centers heated by kerosene stoves, teaching tenants their rights if facing eviction. Their activism became a dynamic duo of heart and mind. Emma's compassion for vulnerable bodies, Celeste's strategic zeal for systemic change. In Washington, the Judicial Integrity Council released its first annual report. It documented measurable increases in courtroom transparency, a 15% reduction in reversed appeals due to procedural errors, and greater public confidence as measured by independent surveys. The report received bipartisan commendation on the Senate floor, and legislators drafted national standards based on its recommendations. Michael watched the proceedings from the gallery, flanked by Clara Hayes and Jack Carter, partners in the fight who had become lifelong friends. The sense of achievement was tempered by the knowledge that vigilance would remain essential. By spring's end, Emma had completed her senior recital at Richmond Conservatory, performing Second Chances with a full chamber orchestra. The final coda brought the audience to tears as violins and cellos swelled in harmony. Celeste delivered a keynote at the post-concert reception, her speech underscoring that while individual stories matter, systemic reform ensures no future child endures the same nightmare. Guests mingled beneath gallery lights, from policymakers to ordinary citizens moved by the twins' journey. That summer, the Reed family planned a quiet retreat in the mountains of North Carolina. They rented a small cabin beside a trout stream, trading daily headlines for the sound of rushing water and pine-scented air. Emma sketched musical themes by the fire, strumming softly on her guitar as Celeste mapped out her essay on judicial impartiality. Michael guided them through fly fishing lessons, laughter echoing off the trees whenever Emma's cast landed a few feet short. They cooked over a campfire, ate s'mores, and told ghost stories under the starlit sky. Moments of simple joy reclaimed after so many trials. As night deepened on their final evening, Michael pulled Emma and Celeste aside beneath a canopy of stars. He shared a pocket watch, inscribed with their mother's name and the Latin phrase equitas, equity. This belonged to her father, he explained. He believed the law should serve every soul equally. He handed the watch to Emma, then to Celeste. Carry this forward. Let it remind you that justice isn't a destination, but a journey of constant care. The twins clasped the watches to their hearts, tears glittering in their eyes. In the soft glow of dawn the next morning, as mist curled over the river, the Reeds took one last walk along the water's edge. They stepped in unison, their reflection wavering on the glassy surface. A family tempered by adversity, resilient through love, and united in purpose. For Michael, Emma, and Celeste, the fight for justice had evolved from a desperate plea for fairness into a lifelong vocation. The echoes of gavels and courtroom whispers had given way to melodies of hope, legislative triumphs, and community gatherings. Their saga, a testament to second chances, continued beyond the final note of any symphony, living on in the cracks mended in the justice system, the hearts restored by compassion, and the bonds of family stronger than ever. As they paused at the creek bank, sunlight painting golden ripples on the water, Michael watched his daughters, survivors, advocates, architects of change, and knew that in their hands, the promise of equity would guide generations to come. Spring sunshine warmed the facade of the International Bar Association headquarters in Vienna as Michael Reed stepped off the airport shuttle. The stately stone building loomed against a pale blue sky, its columns echoing centuries of legal tradition. Today, Michael, Emma, and Celeste would speak at the Global Forum on Judicial Transparency, a culmination of the National Judicial Integrity Initiative's expansion into an international coalition. Inside the Grand Hall, diplomatic delegations from Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Africa filled the ornate seats. Flags arranged like a festival of justice framed the elevated dais. Michael adjusted his tie, a simple navy silk, and glanced at Emma, whose clear eyes reflected both excitement and a trace of nerves. Celeste offered an encouraging smile and squeezed her shoulder. When the moderator introduced the panel, distinguished guests, please welcome Attorney General Michael Reed of the United States and his daughters Emma and Celeste Reed, advocates for judicial reform. The audience rose in respectful applause. Michael approached the podium, the hush settling over the hall like a prayer. Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, he began, voice steady and warm. We gather here because justice is the foundation of every free society. 6 months ago, my daughters faced a miscarriage of justice in our own country. Today, their story guides a movement to ensure that no defendant anywhere endures the pain of bias concealed behind closed doors. He described the key reforms: mandatory bench conference recordings, transparent jury processes, independent oversight, boards, and accessible digital archives. He emphasized that these measures had reduced appeals due to procedural error in pilot states by over 15%, and had restored public trust. Next, Emma took the stage. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, she carried a weathered composition notebook where she had first drafted Second Chances. As a survivor of medical neglect in detention, she said, her voice firm but compassionate, I understand that justice is not abstract. It lives or dies in the details. A missed heartbeat, an unfiled memo, a hidden instruction, each is a human story. Our reforms are designed to preserve life as well as liberty. She spoke of the pediatric emergency protocols now standard in many county jails and the alliance formed between legal and medical professionals to create training modules. The audience responded with thoughtful nods and applause. Celeste followed, stepping to the lectern with quiet confidence. I once believed that the law could not be changed by individuals, she admitted. But I learned that one voice, backed by truth, can crack the hardest armor of corruption. As an intern at Georgetown's Public Policy Clinic, I help young people understand their rights. Internationally, we see different systems, but the struggle for fair due process is universal. Together, we can build a web of accountability that spans borders. Her words were met with enthusiastic approval. Delegates leaned forward, pens poised. After a brief intermission, the forum broke into roundtable discussions. Michael joined a panel of senior judges debating implementation challenges, while Emma and Celeste co-led a workshop on community engagement and education. In the corridors, they encountered colleagues from countries with emerging democracies. A judge from Ghana thanked Michael for sharing audio recording protocols. An advocate from Indonesia asked Emma about her music therapy programs. A law student from Brazil sought advice from Celeste on launching a youth legal clinic. The Reeds realized that their local struggle had sparked global dialogue. After a long day, the trio dined in a cozy Viennese bistro, sampling schnitzel, potato salad, and apple strudel. The conversation was lively. Michael teased Celeste about her obsession with judicial procedure. Emma shared a new movement she composed for a string quartet. They toasted to progress. A local violinist began playing a soft classical piece that reminded them of Second Chances, and they sat in companionable silence, savoring the moment. Back in the United States, autumn brought a new challenge. A scandal surfaced involving a state Supreme Court justice who had privately influenced major corporate litigation in exchange for political contributions. The news broke during a high-profile takeover battle that threatened thousands of jobs. Outrage swelled as journalists uncovered redacted emails and missing transcripts, echoes of the practices the Reeds had fought to eradicate. The National Judicial Integrity Initiative's Rapid Response Team mobilized. Michael convened an emergency video conference with Clara Hayes, Jack Carter, and other key advisors. This is exactly why we built this framework, he said, eyes dark with resolve. We must show that our system can address misconduct at the highest levels. They activated oversight protocols, subpoenas for unredacted communications, forensic audits of the justice's digital records, and public summaries of findings. Emma's medical advocacy partners provided expert testimony on the justice's role in delaying patient rights cases, while Celeste's youth clinic alums drafted legal briefs supporting class action suits from small businesses harmed by biased rulings. The media circus intensified. Cable news panels argued over political motivations. Social media erupted with hashtags calling for resignation and prosecution. In the midst of the storm, the Reeds held firm to principle. Michael appeared on national morning shows, emphasizing that fairness must transcend partisanship. Emma penned an op-ed in a leading newspaper about the human impact of corporate litigation delays. Celeste organized a candlelight vigil at the state capitol, drawing hundreds who demanded accountability. Within weeks, the justice was forced to step down, facing formal impeachment proceedings. Prosecutors announced they would seek criminal charges for obstruction of justice. It was another milestone. The mechanisms the Reeds had put in place were working, even at the apex of power. As winter's chill settled over Richmond, Emma and Celeste prepared for college graduation events. Emma had been accepted into a dual-degree program in music therapy and law at the University of Chicago, and Celeste was heading to Georgetown for public policy. Graduation day at their high school was bittersweet. Teachers embraced them, classmates cheered, and even local officials attended, lauding their contributions. Michael watched from the audience, pride and wistfulness mingling in his heart. After the ceremony, they hosted a community brunch in the school's courtyard. Miss Leia served pastries, Dr. Desai chatted with former classmates, and the twins received dozens of cards and letters from people whose lives they had touched. Emma played Second Chances on a borrowed keyboard as neighbors, students, and reporters gathered around, silent in appreciation. That evening, the Reed family, once fractured by fate, sat together in their mother's farmhouse, now refurbished and warm. Firelight danced on the walls lined with reform awards, newspaper clippings, and family photos. Michael raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To the road ahead," he said. "May we never forget how far we've come and how much remains to be done." They clinked glasses and shared stories late into the night. Celeste's first college political science class, Emma's composition workshops in Chicago hospitals, Michael's upcoming testimony before the National Conference of State Legislatures. Each tale was a thread in the tapestry of their renewed lives. By spring, legislation inspired by the initiative had passed in 10 additional states. New technologies, AI-driven transcript analyzers, blockchain-secured evidence registries, were piloted in major courthouses. The collaborative network now included hundreds of courts worldwide, sharing data and best practices. In June, the Reeds reunited in Vienna for the forum's first anniversary, greeted warmly by allies who had become friends. Emma premiered a chamber version of Second Chances. Celeste co-chaired a workshop on youth engagement, and Michael delivered closing remarks on sustaining momentum. As they departed the conference, Celeste turned to her father and said, "We've made a difference, but the fight for justice is endless." Michael put his arm around her. "That's the point," he replied. "Second chances aren't a destination. They're a journey we share, generation after generation." Their work continued, a living testament to resilience, reform, and the indomitable human spirit. Through every chapter, courtroom battles, legislative halls, and quiet family moments, the Reed family's saga proved that justice, once reclaimed, could illuminate the path forward for all. Over the summer, the Reed family established the Reed Fellowship for Judicial Ethics. This initiative provided funding and mentorship to young lawyers and law students dedicated to courtroom transparency. The inaugural class of 10 fellows included rising stars from diverse backgrounds who came together for a week-long intensive seminar in Washington, D.C. Michael hosted the fellows at his office in the Department of Justice, guiding them through workshops on evidence management, judicial oversight, and community engagement. Emma and Celeste joined as guest speakers, sharing personal insights on the human impact of procedural fairness. The fellows debated mock scenarios of judicial dilemmas, drafted model legislation, and toured federal courtrooms to observe best practices in action. One evening during the seminar, a spirited roundtable discussion centered on the role of technology in the justice system. A fellow named Javier, a coder from Mexico, demonstrated a prototype of a blockchain-based exhibit tracker that ensured immutable records of every piece of evidence. Another fellow, Hannah from Nigeria, shared plans for a mobile app that allowed defendants to access real-time updates on their case files and court dates. Inspired by these innovations, Emma proposed integrating a feature that would notify defense counsel immediately if audio recordings were reviewed or altered. Celeste suggested adding an anonymous tip line for court personnel and the public to report suspicious activities. Michael listened with pride, realizing that the next generation of legal minds would carry the torch further than he ever could have imagined. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Emma's work with the university's music therapy program took on new dimensions. She partnered with the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center to pilot a creative arts therapy curriculum. There, she introduced songwriting workshops that allowed detained youth to process trauma and advocate for themselves through lyrics and melody. The program's early results were promising. Participants showed reduced anxiety, improved communication skills, and a greater willingness to engage with legal counsel. News of her program caught the attention of national nonprofits, and soon Emma was invited to speak at the National Association for Arts and Healthcare conference, where she presented her research and live demonstrations. Celeste's life in Georgetown was equally dynamic. She founded the Student Coalition for Judicial Reform, uniting undergraduates from law, public policy, and sociology departments. The coalition organized a high-profile conference at the law school, featuring panelists such as retired Supreme Court clerks, civil rights litigators, and even Judge Dorsey, who flew in to deliver the keynote address. Celeste moderated a debate on transparency versus privacy, exploring the ethical considerations of recording bench conferences. The event was live-streamed to thousands, sparking spirited online dialogue and inspiring chapters of the coalition at other universities. As autumn turned to winter, the Reed family reconvened at a legal ethics retreat held at the Aspen Lodge in Colorado. They traded city life for snow-capped mountains and crisp, pine-scented air. Michael facilitated a session on judicial independence for local magistrates, while Emma led a music circle around the fireplace, teaching a simplified version of Second Chances on the lodge's antique piano. Celeste organized a moot court designed for first-year law students, challenging them to apply the principles of oversight and fairness to hypothetical cases. Each evening concluded with hearty meals and warm conversation, the crackling fireplace echoing the warmth of their shared purpose. Later that winter, Michael co-authored a book titled _Justice in the Open: How Transparency Transforms Courts _. The book blended legal scholarship, case studies from the initiative's early adopters, and personal anecdotes from the Reed twins' journey. It received critical acclaim in legal journals and became required reading in several law school courses. Emma contributed a chapter on the intersection of health and justice, while Celeste penned a reflective piece on activism and civic responsibility. The royalties from the book were funneled back into the fellowship program, ensuring its sustainability. In small ways, the Reed story seeped into popular culture. A playwright adapted their journey into a stage drama titled _Second Chances _, premiering at a regional theater festival. The play's intimate cast of 4, portraying Michael, Emma, Celeste, and Judge Grant, garnered standing ovations for its raw portrayal of systemic failure and redemption. A local NPR affiliate aired a feature segment on its director's decision to invite actual members of the fellowship to the opening night, forging a bridge between art and activism. By spring, data analytics from the initiative's digital platforms revealed measurable societal benefits. Court backlogs decreased by an average of 12% in pilot jurisdictions. Citizen satisfaction surveys showed a 30% increase in perceived fairness. Overturned convictions due to procedural error dropped by nearly 25%. Legislative bodies in 3 countries considered adopting similar frameworks, citing the initiative as an international benchmark. On the personal front, Emma and Celeste navigated the waters of early adulthood with confidence tempered by humility. Emma balanced coursework with student-run clinics providing music therapy to veteran rehabilitation centers, while maintaining a consistent practice schedule for her piano repertoire. Celeste's days were filled with policy research, legislative drafting, and editorial meetings for the Coalition's journal. Their bond, forged in adversity, now thrived on friendship and shared ambition. One warm June afternoon, Michael received an invitation to return to the Reed twins' alma mater for a special convocation. As he prepared his keynote address, titled, "From Darkness to Daylight, the Power of Accountability," he reflected on the winding path they had taken. When he stepped onto the podium in the school's historic auditorium, he found Emma waiting in the front row, a gentle nod of encouragement on her face. Celeste sat beside her, notebooks filled with notes from earlier sessions. Michael spoke not as a lawyer or a father alone, but as a human being grateful for the chance to rewrite his family's destiny and contribute to a more just world. After the address, students lined up to greet him. Among them was a shy freshman who told Michael she had earlier witnessed similar misconduct in a mock trial and now felt empowered to speak up. Another student asked him to sign a copy of his book, Tears in Her Eyes. Michael smiled, realizing that the ripple effects of their story continued to spread, touching lives in ways they could never fully anticipate. The next morning, over coffee in the school cafeteria, Emma and Celeste shared their own reflections. "I never imagined my music could have this reach," Emma mused, stirring cream into her latte. "It's more than therapy. It's a voice," she said. Celeste nodded, her brow thoughtful. "And I never thought my anger would become a force for policy change. It's amazing what purpose can do." They clinked mugs in a silent toast to the journey ahead. As the sun rose on a new day, the Reed family looked toward the future, an uncharted territory of possibilities where second chances continued to bloom in courtrooms, classrooms, and concert halls alike. Their saga served as a blueprint for others, a living testament that justice, when nurtured by transparency and emboldened by compassion, could resonate across borders and generations. And so, their story advanced beyond the final pages of any script, carried forward by every life they touched and every system they transformed. The late summer breeze rustled through the trees on the campus of Georgetown University as Celeste Reed strolled toward Healy Hall. Leaves, tinged with early hints of gold and crimson, crunched underfoot. Spring had given way to summer, and now the coming academic year pulsed with possibility. As a rising senior in the Public Policy Institute, Celeste carried both the confidence of her past victories and the weight of uncharted ambitions. Today, she was to present the first draft of a new policy proposal to the Institute's Ethics Committee, a set of guidelines designed to standardize judicial oversight councils across state and federal levels. Inside the ornate lecture hall, polished wood paneling gleamed in the afternoon light. Colleagues from various disciplines, law, political science, sociology, and computer science, had gathered. Celeste's carefully printed proposal lay before her, its pages annotated with data from pilot programs and testimonies from judges, attorneys, and citizens. She took a breath, stepped to the podium, and began. "Honorable professors and fellow scholars, our collective efforts in judicial reform have cleared significant hurdles, yet disparities persist across jurisdictions. Today, I propose a unified model for judicial oversight councils that leverages blockchain auditing, mandatory public reporting, and community-appointed citizen liaisons. This model promotes accountability while preserving judicial independence." As she spoke, she observed nods from the faculty panel, including Professor Langford, a former federal judge turned ethics scholar, whose stern visage softened with approval. Questions followed. How to balance confidentiality and transparency? What safeguards protect against frivolous complaints? Celeste responded with precision, citing case studies where procedural errors had been caught early and public trust restored. When the discussion concluded, Professor Langford rose and applauded. "Miss Reed's proposal exemplifies the integration of theory and practice. I look forward to further development." The hall echoed with polite rounds of applause. Celeste exhaled, heart racing but triumphant. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Emma Reed prepared for the premiere of her latest composition with the university orchestra. The symphony hall's cavernous interior smelled of polished wood and straw from the musician's rosin. Emma, now pursuing a dual degree in music therapy and law, flitted between rehearsal sections, offering tempo adjustments and emotional cues. Her Second Chances Suite, an expanded orchestration of her original piano piece, wove together movements titled Confinement, Revelation, Resilience, and Redemption. Each movement reflected a chapter of her family's journey, dark, brooding, strings giving way to triumphant brass. As the first violin struck the opening note of Confinement, Emma watched from the conductor's pit, baton in hand. The mournful cello lines captured the oppressive weight of isolation, while sparse piano arpeggios hinted at fleeting hope. At the climax of Revelation, a solo oboe emerged, its plaintive melody echoing the moment of discovery, Stanton's confession, the leaked recording. The audience sat enthralled as the resilience movement built, strings and woodwinds intertwining in a tapestry of determination. Finally, redemption burst forth, a full ensemble choir joining in a wordless hymn. Emma closed her eyes, memories flooding back, tears mingling with a smile of catharsis. That evening, after the standing ovation, Emma sat backstage with her fellow musicians, exchanging embraces. She thought of Celeste presenting policy proposals and Michael driving reform at the Department of Justice. They were no longer victims of circumstance. They were architects of change. A young cellist approached, eyes shining. "Your story inspired me to pursue law in addition to music," she said. Emma hugged her, voice thick with emotion. "Then we keep telling it together." Back in Washington, Michael Reed's schedule overflowed with speaking engagements, advisory panels, and legislative hearings. Yet he carved out Saturdays for family time, hosting workshops at the Reed Fellowship headquarters. The sunlit atrium of the DOJ building had been converted into a learning space. Rows of folding chairs, projection screens, and breakout stations for hands-on training in evidence logging and courtroom transparency software. On one such Saturday, Michael led a seminar for young attorneys on cross-jurisdictional collaboration, emphasizing the importance of sharing best practices and data. He demonstrated a prototype dashboard that visualized case timelines, jury demographics, and audio recording logs, each entry hashed for security. Fellows from diverse states tested the interface, asking questions about integration with existing court management systems. Michael fielded inquiries with ease, his legal expertise and personal conviction blending seamlessly. Midway through, his phone buzzed. A message from Celeste. "Proposal accepted with revisions. Sent comments." He smiled and displayed her notification to the room, eliciting cheers. In Richmond, the Reed twins returned for another community engagement, this time at a juvenile center where Emma's music therapy program had begun to expand. The gymnasium echoed with the hesitant notes of guitars and keyboards as a new cohort of participants learned to express themselves. Celeste stood nearby, facilitating a legal rights workshop, distributing illustrated pamphlets that explained defendants' rights in clear, accessible language. The teens listened, some nodding, others asking questions. One shy boy raised his hand. "What if no one takes your case?" Celeste knelt beside him. "Then you speak your story as loudly as you can," she replied gently. Over pizza and soda, the participants shared their challenges. Emma encouraged them to write songs about their experiences. Celeste invited them to mock trials where they could practice advocacy. The afternoon ended with a group performance of a simple melody Emma had composed, an anthem of unity and hope. The teens' voices, raw and unpolished, carried a sincerity that moved everyone to tears. As autumn deepened, Michael convened an international webinar with legal leaders from across the globe. The virtual event, co-hosted by the International Consortium for Justice Transparency, focused on scalable solutions for low-resource courts. Presenters from rural India discussed mobile courtrooms. Colleagues from South Africa demonstrated solar-powered recording devices. Advocates in Peru outlined community juror liaison programs. Emma and Celeste joined via video link, offering insights from their American trials and reforms. During a breakout session, Celeste engaged with a judge from Kenya who had adapted her oversight council model to local conditions. They discussed challenges, ensuring internet access, respecting cultural norms, and training clerks in new technologies. Emma shared her experiences in integrating music therapy into correctional settings, suggesting therapeutic workshops to improve mental health and reduce recidivism. The collaborative spirit was tangible as participants exchanged contact information and committed to follow-up projects. Back on campus, Celeste's proposal had been selected for a peer-reviewed journal publication. She and a faculty mentor co-authored an article detailing the model's efficacy, complete with statistical analyses and implementation guidelines. The publication drew attention from legal academicians worldwide, leading to invitations to speak at conferences in London, Tokyo, and Sydney. In Chicago, Emma's advocacy work expanded into a multidisciplinary clinic at the University Hospital, where music therapists, social workers, and legal interns collaborated on patient-centered care plans. In one notable case, a juvenile patient facing foster placement attended songwriting sessions. Through music, she articulated her trauma, which informed legal guardians and medical practitioners, resulting in a more supportive placement. Emma's program began to receive awards from national associations in both music therapy and juvenile justice reform. Meanwhile, Michael received word that the bipartisan reforms he had championed were under consideration by the European Union's Rule of Law Committee. European commissioners plan to pilot similar transparency protocols in selected member states. A delegation visited Washington to observe the DOJ's oversight practices, meeting with Michael, Emma, Celeste, and Clara Hayes. The EU representatives were impressed by the results: reduced procedural appeals, increased public trust metrics, and improved interagency cooperation. One afternoon, as sunlight dappled through the trees in DC's Meridian Hill Park, Michael and Clara Hayes walked briskly toward a bench overlooking the fountain. They discussed upcoming legislative efforts to embed digital oversight tools into nationwide court management systems. Clara, ever precise, noted pilot program benchmarks. Michael, ever visionary, framed the conversation around the broader impact on societal trust. They paused, watching the water arc gracefully, both aware that their work was far from done, but encouraged by the momentum building at home and abroad. That evening, the Reed family reunited in Richmond for a quiet dinner at an Italian trattoria. The table buzzed with stories: Celeste's acceptance of the journal invitation in London, Emma's plans to record a studio album of therapy-inspired compositions, Michael's preparations for an upcoming Senate testimony on budget allocations for judicial transparency. They laughed over shared memories of the courthouse jailer who once sneered at Emma's confession of being an AGO's daughter, and they toasted to the community that had rallied behind them. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Emma paused, looking up at the starry sky. "Remember when I used to sing in that tiny cell?" she mused. "Now I get to hear my music in concert halls." Celeste linked arms with her sister, and I went from behind bars to drafting policy. Michael stood behind them, pride swelling in his chest. "And I started as an attorney who didn't even know he had daughters," he said softly. The sisters turned to him, their smiles luminous. In that moment, the arc of their family's journey, from the injustice that threatened to define them to a global movement, felt complete and yet perpetually unfolding. Over the winter months that followed, the Reed family turned their attention to documenting the impact of their global efforts. Emma edited a documentary short film entitled Voices Unheard, combining footage from her music therapy workshops, interviews with juvenile justice participants, and scenes from the Vienna and Chicago forums. The film premiered at a regional film festival in Richmond, accompanied by a live performance of the soundtrack, Emma's original compositions woven under. Celeste spearheaded the creation of a comprehensive digital repository, the Justice Transparency Archive, hosted on a cloud platform with multilingual support. The archive collected audio recordings, jury selection logs, policy papers, and reform toolkits. Universities, bar associations, and civil society groups could access it freely, adapting resources to local needs. When a flood threatened a courthouse in Central Europe, lawyers tapped the archive's offline-capable modules to continue oversight. In March, Michael accepted an invitation to keynote the World Justice Forum in New Zealand. There, under a canopy of Southern Hemisphere stars, he addressed delegates from over 60 nations. "We stand at a crossroads where technology and transparency can elevate justice for all. Our work is not done. It is just beginning." His words resonated in a region grappling with remote court access, indigenous rights, and resource constraints. Meanwhile, Emma was invited to collaborate with a leading international NGO on a project to integrate creative arts therapy into refugee camp support programs. Alongside fellow therapists, she conducted virtual songwriting sessions with displaced youth, translating their experiences into chords and lyrics that advocated for their rights at the United Nations. The program's success led to new funding opportunities and cross-sector partnerships. Celeste, balancing coursework with her commitments, launched an online mentorship network for law students interested in judicial reform. Over 1,000 members joined within weeks, sharing internship opportunities, research collaborations, and peer support. The network's first virtual conference featured panelists from 4 continents, illuminating the universality of the fight for fairness. As spring approached again, the Reeds found themselves planning the 2nd anniversary celebration of the National Judicial Integrity Initiative. They chose to host a hybrid event, in person in Washington, D.C., and streamed worldwide. Preparations included coordinating simultaneous translation, live stream logistics, and an interactive app allowing global participants to submit questions and propose new features in real time. On the day of the anniversary, the Grand Hall of the DOJ building shimmered with activity. The national anthem, played by a youth orchestra with Emma on piano, set a solemn tone. Celeste moderated a panel on emerging ethical dilemmas posed by AI in legal contexts. Michael delivered opening remarks, weaving personal anecdotes with policy insights. Among the keynote speakers was Judge Dorsey, who reflected on her role in the Reed case and urged continued vigilance. That evening, at a gala hosted on the rooftop terrace overlooking the Capitol, Celeste and Emma danced in the crisp spring air. Michael mingled with dignitaries, balancing fatherly pride with professional satisfaction. Fireworks erupted overhead, their multicolored bursts mirrored in the Reeds' bright eyes. The journey, from a packed courtroom to global stages and back to a family celebration, felt full circle. In the quiet aftermath, Michael, Emma, and Celeste gathered for one more conversation near the reflecting pool. The water shimmered with the city lights. Emma closed her eyes and whispered, "We did it." Celeste smiled, replying, "And we're just getting started." Michael placed an arm around each daughter. "Second chances," he said, "are our legacy and our responsibility to the future." As they walked away, the reflecting pool behind them glowed under the night sky, a testament to clarity, renewal, and the enduring promise of justice rising anew with each generation. Autumn leaves swept across the quad of Georgetown University as Professor Celeste Reed paused outside Healy Hall. The crisp air carried the scent of aging books and distant laughter from students hurrying between classes. Today, she was scheduled to deliver her first graduate lecture on sustainable judicial governance, a culmination of years of practical experience and academic research. She entered the lecture hall, greeted by rows of eager faces, law students, policy scholars, and visiting fellows from the Reed Fellowship Program. At the podium, Celeste opened her notes and began, "Good morning. When we last met, I was here as a student. Today, I stand as your guide through the challenges of integrating transparency, technology, and ethics into court administration." Her voice was confident, seasoned by countless public speaking engagements. She outlined the latest developments: AI-driven jury summary dashboards, real-time translation services for non-English speaking jurors, and blockchain-based evidence chains that now served in state courts across 3 continents. Following the lecture, Celeste convened a roundtable discussion with her students. A young woman from Kenya raised her hand. Professor Reed, how do we ensure rural courts with limited internet can adopt these technologies? Celeste smiled, drawing from her own collaborations in low-resource settings. We build offline modules with periodic synchronization, she explained. Use solar-powered hardware and train local clerks in simple protocols. Community partnerships can supply on-site support. The student nodded, typing fervently. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Emma Reed was finalizing her debut studio album, a collection of therapeutic compositions based on themes of resilience and hope. The album, titled Renewal, featured orchestral arrangements interlaced with spoken-word testimonies from justice system survivors. She listened intently in the mixing booth as the producer adjusted balance levels, ensuring the cello lines resonated over soft piano chords without overpowering the narrative voiceovers. When satisfied, she leaned back, the weight of creative control mingling with relief. "That's it," she whispered, the voice of second chances. Across the country in Washington, Michael Reed was deep in planning for the 10th anniversary of the National Judicial Integrity Initiative. He sat in his office overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue, walls lined with framed newspaper front pages documenting milestone moments: Stanton arrest, retrial verdict, global forums. On his desk lay invitations to international delegates, draft itineraries, and a prototype mobile app for remote court oversight he had commissioned. He tapped his pen against the memorandum outlining a vision to embed digital ethics curricula in law schools nationwide. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Reed, a logistics coordinator, informed him, "The German federal court delegation has confirmed attendance." Michael nodded, his mind already mapping the schedule for candidate presentations and working group sessions. That evening, the Reed siblings reunited in Richmond at the historic Lafayette Hotel for a reunion dinner marking the album release and the anniversary planning. Celeste arrived in a tailored navy blazer, braiding Emma's hair behind her ear as they greeted each other. Michael joined them from the bar, a whiskey glass in hand, his eyes bright. They toasted to progress, their conversation weaving between personal updates and program logistics. Emma's album launch concert date, Celeste's lecture schedule, Michael's keynote speeches. Amid laughter and clinking glasses, Emma pulled out a small recorder and played the opening track of Renewal, a gentle piano introduction that swelled into a full-string quartet. The hotel lounge fell silent, guests leaning in to hear the music that once reverberated through prison walls. Celeste closed her eyes, the melody stirring memories. Michael reached out, touching both their hands. "Every note carries our story," he murmured. Over the next weeks, the trio embarked on separate missions. Celeste traveled to London to present her published article at the International Law Faculty Forum. Her lecture on ethical imperatives in digital courtrooms challenged traditionalist views, urging colleagues to embrace accountability technologies. She met with judicial trainers from Scotland, exchanged case studies with German legal scholars, and toured a Helsinki pilot courtroom outfitted with real-time transcription displays. Emma's album, Renewal, debuted at the Chicago Symphony Hall. The performance featured live strings, narration by survivors, and a multimedia backdrop showing images of court cases transformed by transparency. As the final track faded, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Emma stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes, and spoke briefly. "This music is for every soul given a second chance." Cameras flashed, messages of support flooded social media. Michael immersed himself in 10-year anniversary preparations. The anniversary forum would coincide with the United Nations high-level meeting on rule of law. Invitations had gone out to Supreme Court justices, chief prosecutors, civil society leaders, and technology innovators. The theme, Justice at 10, Sustaining Transparency, Cultivating Trust. He finalized a keynote echoing lessons learned, how personal experiences could catalyze systemic reforms. As the busy autumn days gave way to winter's early dusk, the family reunited in Washington for the forum's opening. Dignitaries gathered in the Grand Hall, cameras rolling. live stream links active for remote participants in remote Pacific Island courts. Celeste moderated a session on guardrails for judicial AI. Emma performed selections from Renewal, and Michael delivered his keynote, weaving narrative with policy proposals. Among the attendees, delegates from the Middle East shared how they adapted the initiative's transparency protocols in tribal courts, respecting cultural norms while enhancing oversight. Representatives from South America discussed mobile courtroom vans filming remote proceedings. Veterans of the Reed Fellowship presented reports on local projects, solar-powered recorders in Arctic communities, digital jury instructions for low-literate populations, community juror councils in urban neighborhoods. That evening, under a crisp December sky, Michael, Emma, and Celeste walked the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Street lamps glowed like sentinels, the monument's columns illuminated in soft white light. Emma strapped on her scarf. "It's surreal how far we've come," she said, voice quiet. Celeste nodded, her breath visible in the night air. From shackles to symphonies. Michael smiled down at them, his heart full. And from silence to global dialogue. They paused at the memorial steps, gazing at Lincoln's towering statue. Michael placed a hand on each shoulder. "The journey continues," he said softly. Second chances are not a destination. They're a commitment to keep forging ahead. In the days that followed, the impact report was released. Measurable outcomes showing sustained reductions in procedural errors, enhanced jury confidence metrics, and expanded fellowship networks. Legislatures in 5 new countries committed to pilot reforms. Emma launched a scholarship for justice system musicians. Celeste secured funding for digital ethics research. Michael began drafting guidelines for AI standards in courtrooms. Through every season, blossoming spring classes, summer symposiums, autumn conferences, winter galas, the Reed family's narrative endured. Their story of resilience, reform, and reunion resonated in every courtroom that opened its doors to accountability, in every student empowered to challenge injustice, and in every note of music that declared, "We have been given a second chance." As the late winter rains fell on Washington, the Reeds looked toward the future with unwavering determination, ready to write the next chapter in the ongoing story of Justice Reborn. Over the winter months that followed, the Reed family turned their attention to documenting the impact of their global efforts. Emma edited a documentary short film entitled Voices Unheard, combining footage from her music therapy workshops, interviews with juvenile justice participants, and scenes from the Vienna and Chicago forums. The film premiered at a regional film festival in Richmond, accompanied by a live performance of the soundtrack, Emma's original compositions woven under the silver lights of the projector. Audience members wept as melodies intertwined with the voices of those who once felt silenced. Meanwhile, Celeste spearheaded the creation of a comprehensive digital repository, the Justice Transparency Archive, hosted on a cloud platform with multilingual support. The archive collected audio recordings, jury selection logs, policy papers, and reform toolkits. Universities, bar associations, and civil society groups could access it freely, adapting resources to local needs. When flooding threatened a courthouse in Central Europe, lawyers tapped the archive's offline-capable modules to continue oversight even without connectivity. In March, Michael accepted an invitation to keynote the World Justice Forum in New Zealand. There, under a canopy of Southern Hemisphere stars, he addressed delegates from over 60 nations. "We stand at a crossroads where technology and transparency can elevate justice for all. Our work is not done. It is just beginning." His words resonated in a region grappling with remote court access, indigenous rights, and resource constraints, inspiring collaborative workshops to build solar-powered recorders for remote hearings. Meanwhile, Emma was invited to collaborate with a leading international NGO on a project to integrate creative arts therapy into refugee camp support programs. Alongside fellow therapists, she conducted virtual songwriting sessions with displaced youth. translating their experiences into chords and lyrics that advocated for their rights at the United Nations. The program's success led to new funding opportunities and cross-sector partnerships. Celeste, balancing coursework with her commitments, launched an online mentorship network for law students interested in judicial reform. Over 1,000 members joined within weeks, sharing internship opportunities, research collaborations, and peer support. The network's first virtual conference featured panelists from 4 continents, illuminating the universality of the fight for fairness and justice. As spring approached again, the Reeds found themselves planning the 2nd anniversary celebration of the National Judicial Integrity Initiative. They chose to host a hybrid event, in person in Washington, D.C., and streamed worldwide. Preparations included coordinating simultaneous translation, live stream logistics, and an interactive app, allowing global participants to submit questions and propose new features in real time. On the day of the anniversary, the Grand Hall of the DOJ building shimmered with activity. The national anthem, played by a youth orchestra with Emma on piano, set a solemn tone. Celeste moderated a panel on emerging ethical dilemmas posed by AI in legal contexts. Michael delivered opening remarks, weaving personal anecdotes with policy insights. Among the keynote speakers was Judge Dorsey, who reflected on her role in the Reed case and urged continued vigilance. That evening, at a gala hosted on the rooftop terrace overlooking the Capitol, Celeste and Emma danced in the crisp spring air. Michael mingled with dignitaries, balancing fatherly pride with professional satisfaction. Fireworks erupted overhead, their multicolored bursts mirrored in the Reeds' bright eyes. The journey, from a packed courtroom to global stages and back to family celebrations, felt full circle. In the quiet aftermath, Michael, Emma, and Celeste gathered for one more conversation near the reflecting pool. The water shimmered with the city lights. Emma closed her eyes and whispered, "We did it." Celeste smiled, replying, "And we're just getting started." Michael placed an arm around each daughter. "Second chances," he said, "are our legacy and our responsibility to the future." As they walked away, the reflecting pool behind them glowed under the night sky, a testament to clarity, renewal, and the enduring promise of justice rising anew with each generation. Winter had given way to the first blossoms of spring when the Reed family embarked on a new chapter. The sprawling grounds of the Supreme Court of the United States shimmered in the morning light as Michael Reed, Emma, and Celeste stepped onto Capitol grounds. Today marked the ceremonial launch of the Constitutional Transparency Project, a bold expansion of their decades-old work aimed at embedding accountability measures into the highest echelon of the judicial system. The morning air was crisp, laced with the scent of blooming cherry blossoms. A podium had been set before the grand steps of the court, draped in navy blue fabric and flanked by the American flag and a new banner bearing the project's emblem, an open book entwined with scales of justice. Senators, justices, legal luminaries, and members of the public gathered in respectful silence as the Chief Justice herself took the stage to introduce the Reeds. Chief Justice Elena Martinez spoke with measured solemnity. "For generations, our Constitution has guided a nation so that every person might experience justice under law. We owe a debt to those who safeguard its promise. Today, we honor 3 individuals whose dedication has deepened that promise: Attorney General Michael Reed, his daughter Emma Reed, and his daughter Celeste Reed. Their work has inspired reforms at every level of our courts. It is my privilege to welcome them as honorary co-chairs of the Constitutional Transparency Project." Applause rippled across the crowd as the Reeds took their places. Michael adjusted the microphone and began, "Thank you, Chief Justice Martinez, for this honor. Justice depends not only on fair laws, but on fair application. Over the past decade, we have seen how darkness hides procedural errors, erodes trust, and damages lives. With the Constitutional Transparency Project, we pledge to shine a light on the processes of our highest courts, ensuring historic decisions reflect the same principles of openness we champion at the trial level." he unveiled the first measures. Live. Public webcasts of Supreme Court oral arguments, searchable archives of judicial memos and draft opinions, redacting sensitive deliberations when necessary, and an advisory council of citizen representatives to observe administrative council meetings. The goal was to make the court's work comprehensible and accessible without compromising judicial independence. Emma took the stage next, sunlight glinting off her dark hair. My contribution to this project is twofold. First, to ensure that accessibility extends to those with disabilities by providing real-time sign language interpretation and audio descriptions for webcast content, and second, to use narrative and music to translate complex legal language into public-friendly summaries. For example, during high-profile hearings, my team will produce short documentary segments that explore the human stakes behind every argument. Celeste concluded the launch speeches. We recognize that transparency alone is insufficient if the public lacks the tools to engage effectively. Therefore, we are establishing a civic court fellowship aimed at training young leaders to navigate court procedures, understand constitutional principles, and advocate for marginalized communities seeking redress. Fellows will be embedded with clerks, attend oral arguments in person, and produce community workshops to demystify the court's work. After the speeches, the assembled dignitaries mingled over light refreshments in the marble foyer. Michael conversed with former clerks who praised the new public archive. Emma met with accessibility advocates who had long campaigned for improved courtroom accommodations. Celeste drafted follow-up plans with civic educators eager to host the first fellowship cohort. The buzz was palpable, a testament to how far the seeds planted years ago had grown. Later that afternoon, the Reeds visited the Library of Congress, where the inaugural collection of the court's digital archives was stored. They walked along shelves of ancient tomes and scanned flags, each a silent witness to history. Michael ran a hand across a leather-bound volume containing early Supreme Court opinions and mused on how transparency might have altered the course of landmark disputes. Emma and Celeste exchanged a private smile, aware that their efforts would reach into these hallowed halls for generations to come. Back in Richmond, student groups at their old high school organized a Constitution Day assembly to celebrate the new project. Celeste delivered a keynote via live stream, connecting with young minds in classrooms across the state. Emma premiered a suite of short musical pieces that accompanied recitations of the preamble, a creative fusion of artistry and civic education. Their former teachers watched with pride as the twins engaged the next wave of civic participants, proving that legal reform and cultural enrichment could march hand in hand. That evening, the family reunited at their mother's farmhouse for a quiet dinner under string lights in the orchard. They savored fresh asparagus and grilled trout, the local spring bounty. Candles flickered as Celeste passed around hand-drawn maps of upcoming fellowship sites. New York's urban courthouses, the rural districts of Montana, the border regions of Texas, and even tribal courts in the Pacific Northwest. Each site represented a promise to uphold their values everywhere. Emma produced a small wooden box she'd carved containing miniature hand-painted symbols of scales, gavels, and musical notes, the trifecta of their mission. She handed one to her father and one to her sister. "For remembrance," she said, "and for inspiration." Michael placed his in his briefcase. Celeste set hers on her desk in New York, where she would soon continue her work. Months passed as the Constitutional Transparency Project took shape. Technical teams installed cameras in the Supreme Court chamber, coordinated with the clerk's office to integrate metadata tagging, and developed a public engagement platform complete with educational videos narrated by Emma. Civic court fellows arrived from across the country, finding mentors in retired justices, academic researchers, and community leaders. Celeste oversaw their orientation, guiding them through administrative protocols and introducing them to the language of constitutional jurisprudence. Across state capitals, similar transparency expansions rolled out. In California, mobile bus courtrooms broadcast oral arguments to rural towns. In New England, interactive kiosks allowed citizens to view court records alongside explanatory timelines. In the Midwest, podcasts produced by local lawyers told stories of how small claims courts resolved neighbor disputes. The movement Reed, then Reed and Daughters, had begun at a motel desk in a small town, had blossomed into a nationwide ecosystem. Emma's musical collaborations grew beyond domestic bounds. The United Nations invited her to compose a theme for its Rule of Law Matters campaign. She worked with youth from refugee backgrounds, recording multilingual lyrics about justice and hope. The final composition premiered at the UN General Assembly, receiving enthusiastic applause from diplomats and activists alike. Celeste watched via live stream, her heart swelling. Meanwhile, Michael testified before a Senate subcommittee on judicial reform, presenting data that showed marked improvements in public confidence metrics and reduction of procedural appeals. Senators from both parties lauded the project's achievements, and a new bipartisan bill proposed permanent funding for the public archive and civic fellowships. Michael's weathered hands gripped the lectern as he delivered the closing line. A transparent court is not a weakened court. It is a reaffirmed one. As the 10-year anniversary of the original retrial approached, the Reeds prepared a commemorative program. It featured essays from civic fellows reflecting on their experiences, snapshots of reform initiatives worldwide, and Emma's updated composition of Second Chances, now an orchestral suite performed by the National Symphony Orchestra. Celeste wrote an epilogue documenting how transparency initiatives had evolved, drawing lessons for future generations. On the night before the anniversary, they gathered in Washington at the Kennedy Center Theater. The lights dimmed as the orchestra began. Emma sat at the piano for the solo movement, her fingers flying across the keys with confident grace. Celeste stood backstage, her hands clasped tight as she watched projections of courthouse footage play in time with the music. Michael sat in the front row, tears shining under the spotlight's glow. When the final chord hung in the air, the audience rose in rapturous applause. Emma's bow beneath the chandelier showers of light illuminated her radiant smile. Celeste joined her on stage, and together they faced the crowd with pride and humility. Michael joined them, and the three embraced, father and daughters united in a moment that echoed the beginning chapter in a modest courthouse parking lot. Their story, etched indelibly into the fabric of American justice, continued onward. For every courthouse that embraced oversight, every citizen who understood their rights more deeply, and every note of music played to heal wounds, the Reeds' legacy grew. They had proven that change begins with courage, endures with collaboration, and thrives when second chances become the heartbeat of a nation committed to justice for all. Years passed, and the seeds planted by the Constitutional Transparency Project bore fruit across the globe. In the decades since its inauguration, dozens of nations adopted similar measures. Public archives flourished, oral arguments were made livelier by community engagement, and civic education on judicial processes became part of school curricula. Emma's Second Chances Suite was performed by youth orchestras in Seoul, Nairobi, and Sao Paulo. Celeste's fellowship model inspired peer programs in Canada and India, and Michael's framework guided reform commissions in smaller democracies emerging from conflict. One bright morning in London, Celeste boarded the tube for a visit to Scotland's Court of Session, where she had been invited to advise on implementing courtroom transparency for cases involving vulnerable witnesses. The modern glass-walled courtroom glowed in the spring sun. Judges wearing traditional robes greeted her with curiosity and respect. She and their clerks mapped out logistical plans to provide real-time transcripts and private consultation booths for witnesses, ensuring their voices were heard without fear of retaliation. Meanwhile, Emma arrived in Tokyo to work with the Tokyo Philharmonic for a special cultural exchange concert. She collaborated with Japanese composers to weave traditional melodies into her orchestral arrangement, celebrating shared values of justice and community healing. The performance was broadcast by NHK, and afterward, Emma joined a panel discussion on the role of arts in social change, joined by poets, filmmakers, and activists who saw creative expression as a catalyst for dialogue about human rights. Back in Washington, Michael trekked through the White House corridors to meet with senior policymakers. A decade-old administrative order that he had championed was due for renewal, and plans were underway to incorporate next-level innovations. AI-assisted case backlog predictions, interactive jury selection robotics to remove manual biases, and virtual reality tours of courtrooms to prepare jurors for what to expect. A bipartisan bill was drafted to fund a 5-year pilot of these initiatives in federal district courts. In Richmond, Emma and Celeste reunited on the front porch of their mother's farmhouse, which they had restored as a community heritage site. As children on summer breaks, they once played among the daisies left by their mother. Now they hosted workshops here, music camps, and mock trial programs for underserved youth. They watched as a group of students debated a mock case under a magnolia tree, the young voices carrying clarity and conviction that filled them with hope. Celeste later spoke at a virtual town hall streamed to community centers nationwide, where viewers asked candid questions about judicial access in rural counties. She navigated queries about remote video testimony, offline evidence review kits, and mobile civic labs that delivered educational modules by bus. Her answers, grounded in practical experience, resonated with viewers discovering their power to engage with the justice system. Emma, meanwhile, released a second album, Harmony for Justice, featuring collaborations with international artists. One track wove in the voices of participants from refugee camps in Jordan. Another featured children's choirs from Baltimore, singing lyrics co-written by teens encountering the law for the first time. Proceeds from the album funded music therapy scholarships for youth in correctional facilities. On a crisp autumn day in Geneva, Michael convened the International Council on Court Innovation. Delegates from over 80 countries attended, many of whom had been inspired by the Reed's work. Panels discussed cybersecurity for court records, cross-border cooperation on extradition cases, and global standards for human-centered court design. Emma co-presented a case study on how music therapy reduced trauma in juvenile hearings, while Celeste chaired a session on youth involvement in legal reform, showcasing essays from fellows worldwide. Their efforts also filtered into academic discourse. Celeste's book, The Open Court Principles and Practice of Judicial Transparency, became a staple in law school syllabi from Oxford to Melbourne. Emma's research on the neurological benefits of music in stressful settings was published in the Journal of Arts and Health. Michael's policy papers continued to influence new generations of attorneys general, whose offices now routinely partnered with civic technologists, educators, and health professionals. Amid these global travels, the Reed family always found time to gather. Each summer, they returned to the farmhouse for a family reunion retreat. Workshops on civic engagement, songwriting circles by the bonfire, and community barbecues became traditions. Miss Leah and Dr. Desai attended, guiding sessions on mentorship and family resilience. The farmhouse, once a place of memory for their mother, now served as a beacon of ongoing collective purpose. In the spring of 2038, exactly 30 years after the Reeds had first heard those fateful words in the courthouse, words that had set their lives on a path of transformation, the Supreme Court of the United States unveiled a permanent public exhibition at its visitor center. Titled Justice Unveiled, the exhibit chronicled the journey from closed-door judiciary practices to the era of openness. Photo panels displayed images of packed courtrooms, news clippings of overturned verdicts, and scenes from the Reed's initial trials. Interactive displays allowed visitors to explore audio recordings, witness interviews, and multimedia presentations of civic fellowships in action. At the exhibition's dedication, Michael, Emma, and Celeste stood alongside Chief Justice Martinez, their faces projected on large screens for the assembled crowd. Emma played a live rendition of Second Chances, while Celeste moderated a panel of former civic fellows sharing onstage testimonials about how the transparency movement had shaped their careers. Michael offered remarks on the enduring need for vigilance, reminding attendees that transparency was not a final state, but an ongoing commitment. That evening, in an octagonal chamber lined with classical statues, the Reeds celebrated quietly. Tall windows looked out on the Capitol dome lit against the twilight. Michael raised a glass of sparkling elderflower wine. "To every generation that has carried this torch," he said, voice thick with emotion. Emma and Celeste joined in a trio of toasts, one for past achievements, one for present possibilities, and one for the future yet unwritten. As they departed into the moonlit night, cherry blossoms drifted in the breeze, the same breeze that had greeted them at the project's launch. Their journey, from personal tragedy through courtroom battles to systemic transformation on a global scale, stood as a testament to the power of second chances. And as new petals settled on the walkways, the Reeds knew that their work would continue to blossom in the hands of countless others committed to justice, transparency, and the unbreakable bond of family. In the soft glow of dawn, the Reeds gathered one last time at their mother's restored farmhouse, now a place of pilgrimage for justice advocates. The morning air was crisp, and the dewy grass sparkled under cherry blossoms that lined the gravel path leading to the front porch. Michael Reed stood at the edge of a small crowd comprising his oldest civic fellows, former judges, community leaders, and legal scholars who had flown in for this final gathering marking 30 years of transformation. Emma adjusted her scarf and looked around. Children from the local music therapy program played quietly on the lawn, guided by alumni of her Chicago initiative. Nearby, Celeste mingled with aspiring policy interns, reviewing draft proposals for the next wave of fellowship sites. The farmhouse brimmed with life, laughter, conversation, and the hum of ongoing purpose. Michael raised his hand, and a hush fell. 30 years ago, he began, voice steady with emotion, we stood in the shadows of injustice. Today we stand in a garden of renewal. Each of you here has tended these flowers of reform with dedication and love. We launched initiatives that began with two twins' voices crying out for help and grew into a global chorus demanding accountability. He gestured toward Emma. My daughter, who through her music taught us that every heartbeat matters, has revolutionized how we heal the human spirit within the confines of institutions. Emma, your compositions have become anthems for those who otherwise would have been silent. Emma's eyes glistened as she nodded, glancing at the young musicians practicing nearby. Music is a universal language. When we sing together, even in the face of oppression, we remind each other of our shared humanity. I dedicate each note to the souls who taught me resilience. Michael then turned to Celeste. And my daughter, who transformed righteous anger into policy change, Celeste. Your work in training tens of thousands of civic leaders has woven transparency into the fabric of communities worldwide. Celeste smiled, touching a copy of her book, The Open Court, tucked under her arm. Policy without participation is sterile. By empowering voices, especially those on the margins, we ensure that the justice system reflects the people it serves. This fellowship movement is my inheritance from our journey. Michael stepped down and extended his arms, inviting the assembled group closer. Now let us plant new seeds. He handed Emma a watering can carved with daisies, the emblem of their mother's favorite flower. Celeste lifted a young sapling, its roots wrapped in fertile soil. Together, under the blossoming trees, they dug a small hole and set the sapling in place. As Emma poured water over the roots and Celeste covered them with earth, Michael sprinkled seeds around the base. The group murmured encouragement and moved to fill in the dirt. The sapling, a symbol of ongoing transformation, stood resilient and upright, ready to flourish in seasons to come. Later on the porch, the Reeds joined hands in a circle. No speeches were needed. The energy of shared purpose spoke more powerfully than words. Michael looked at his daughters, partners in work and life, and felt a deep gratitude that their journey had grown beyond any single courtroom or initiative. As the sun climbed higher, They moved inside for a communal brunch. The table, worn smooth by generations, was laid with heirloom breads, garden vegetables, and a birthday cake bearing 3 candles, one for each of them. Miss Leia and Dr. Desai sat at the head of the table, their smiles reflecting years of steadfast support. Old friends shared stories of early struggles, while new faces spoke of future projects. Emma led a toast. "To second chances," she said, raising her glass. "May we always remember that every seed we plant today will become shade for tomorrow's children." Celeste followed. "To transparency and trust," she said, eyes bright. "May we continue to open doors and build bridges between courts and communities," Michael concluded. "To the journey ahead," he said quietly. "Our work is never finished, but together, we have shown that justice can evolve. May these roots grow deep and wide." The assembled crowd cheered and clinked glasses, a symphony of affirmations. Outside, the spring breeze carried the petals of the cherry blossoms, swirling like confetti in celebration. As the day wound down, Michael walked alone to the front porch swing where their mother once sat. He placed a hand on the weathered wood and closed his eyes, recalling the challenges that had ignited their cause. The farmhouse, once a place of memories unspoken, had become a beacon of hope and a crucible of change. Inside, Emma and Celeste packed their belongings for travels ahead. Celeste would return to New York to expand her fellowship into community colleges across the Northeast. Emma would embark on a global tour with her latest album, using concert venues as hubs for pop-up civic clinics. Their mother's farmhouse would stand here, ready to welcome new advocates seeking inspiration. By twilight, the crowd had dispersed. Michael joined his daughters on the porch swing, the final light of day painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. Emma rested her head on his shoulder. Celeste leaned against his other side. The sapling they had planted earlier caught the last rays of sun, its young leaves glowing with promise. They sat in comfortable silence, feeling the pulse of a legacy that had grown far beyond their original aspirations. Each moment of justice reclaimed, each voice empowered, each melody shared. These were the true fruits of their labor. When the first star appeared, Celeste whispered, "Do you think Mom would be proud?" Michael kissed her forehead. She would be overjoyed to see how her lessons of hope and perseverance have flourished. Emma looked up at the sky, "And we'll keep her daisies growing." Under the canopy of that starry night, the Reed family embraced their past, celebrated their journey, and anticipated the endless horizons of justice yet to come. Their story, born in a courtroom gavel's echo, had become an epic of compassion, reform, and unbreakable bonds, destined to inspire generations who would walk through open doors of transparency into a world where every person's story could be heard and honored.